I'll just again tell your our Chinese viewers that the Conservative Party in Britain is currently holding its annual conference, which is a major political event in the life of political parties here. And of course, remember, they were the government until last year, and they've been the government for most of the 20th century and much of the 19th century, and they were the government for much of the 21st century, what we've had of it too. And, you know, it's the government of Churchill, Cameron, of Disraeli, of Thatcher, and of all of these people. Hardly anybody turned up to the conference. I mean, you see pictures and the halls were empty. And, their support has fallen to 15%, 15%, which just means basically people who, you know, are old people who've always voted Conservative and can't imagine voting for anyone else. And most bizarre of all, the party ran a seance. I'm not, so they had a post box where you could write a letter and send your letter to Margaret Thatcher, who is of course dead. I mean, seriously, that was one of the things they did. So I mean, you know, seeing what has been for the last 250 years the dominant party in Britain implode in this way tells you the implosion in politics and trust in politics and the cynicism that exists in the West now.
Yeah. We can stay in Britain. That there is have you paid attention to, there is a spy case. There were two guys, both named Christopher, right? Christopher Cash, Christopher Berry. But that case collapsed. Now, I never quite understand what they did. They always said they provided unclassified document to somebody, I guess, in China. Well, but if it's unclassified, so what's the problem? I don't get it.
Sophia, I'm glad you don't get it, because nor do I. And I've never been a criminal lawyer, but you know, I did used to do legal work. So you would have thought that a person like me would be the person who would understand it. Anyway, what I heard is that this was always a case that was incredibly shaky. It was full of holes, and it was most likely to fail. And that it was all but impossible to see that these people were spies in any true sense, in any sense at all, in fact. But of course, that's not the word that is being spread in Britain. Okay, the word that's being spread through the media in Britain is that the reason the case collapsed is supposedly because during the trial, the British government told the court that Britain didn't consider China a threat. So this was supposedly the reason why the trial collapsed. How that has any bearing on whether someone is a spy or not, I am completely unable to see. But you could see what happens, how they do it. The case is brought on the flimsiest grounds. The case collapses. The case, however, already establishes the idea in Britain that China operates spies in Britain. When the case collapses, it's again, the idea is planted that it's because the British government, for some reason, didn't say that China is a threat, with the implication that China is indeed a threat. So you can see how public opinion is being shaped.
Yeah, that's another thing. So Keir Starmer, exactly what is his China policy is also confusing. You see this case, they clearly trying to smear China, right? So the case is all about China. At the same time, I think Jonathan Powell, he's a national security advisor. I didn't know, in the beginning of this year, apparently visited China, but it's not widely reported until China is the one who, I guess, gave some account about this. So it sounds like he also trying to get closer to China, I guess, to get something, out of China or something. So exactly what is his China policy? Does he try to work with China or not?
Well, historically, in the past, he has been somebody who's wanted to have relatively good relations with China. But if he wants to do that, he's swimming now against the tide, because the tide is to become increasingly hostile to China. I mean, you're shaking your head, and I agree with you. I mean, I am completely at loss to understand this. And by the way, this is very against the spirit and feeling of the British people. I mean, if you're talking about Russia, for example, there's always been in Britain a current of public opinion that has been very hostile to Russia.
Mhm.
But there has never been one that is hostile to China. I mean, the British overall have traditionally been very favorable towards
Mhm.
China. And there is a British Chinese community in Britain, and it's everywhere, and it is well regarded, and it is very liked, and it is well integrated in British life. And there are none of the tensions between Chinese people and British people that you find between British people and members of other communities. In fact, the question never arises. So this is very artificial, but it is now being deliberately constructed. And you see this in the media, and you see this in trials of this kind, and you see this in the universities as well, by the way, which are being told to stop taking students from China,
Mhm.
even though students from China supported universities.
Yeah. What's going on in France? So this prime
Yeah.
minister, he was like 24 hours and then he's gone. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's part of you asked me this question about the deeper
Yeah.
crisis that we have across the West, and this is
Mhm.
another manifestation of it. I mean, France also has problems which are very similar to Japan's problems, and very similar to Britain's problems,
Uh-huh.
and I would say ultimately very similar to America's problems.
Uh-huh.
That we have deep stagnation in the economy. France is intrinsically a very rich country. There's still large amounts of wealth there that could be deployed and invested effectively and successfully. There are great engineering competencies. The administration works a lot better than the British one does. So, drive on a French road and drive on a British road, and you will see how superior the French road is. And the same is true with the trains and the hospitals. But overall, France is also sliding.
Mhm.
And we have a president who is not fundamentally interested in dealing with these things, who is Emmanuel Macron,
Mhm.
and who wants to pursue policies of European integration, who's all into grand strategies and simple, facile solutions. France is a country that actually used to do planning. I mean, I lived in France for a time,
Mhm.
and in the 1940s, after the Second World War, the French economy was in an absolutely terrible state. And there was a brilliant um, civil servant, a man called Jean Monnet, who was a close friend of General de Gaulle, but who also had very good links with the French Communist Party and with the French trade unions. And they all came together and they looked at the problems in the French economy. And Monet put together a plan which is to focus on particular sectors, and investment went into them, and the workers agreed that they would not seek excessive pay rises, even though the money was flowing in, and the economy transformed. And from having been a country in crisis in the 40s, by the 1960s, it was becoming very rich.
Mhm.
So France has that tradition, but the president is not interested in doing this. So he's interested in other things. He has destabilized the political situation in France because he seems obsessed with keeping Marine Le Pen and the National Rally out of government. I mean, this is the only thing he really seems to care about. The result is that France, for practically all of the time that he has been president of France, has been without an effective government, because it's not really government, it's all been intrigues and manipulations and things of this kind. And the result is that we now have a political crisis. So debt levels are out of control. The economy is stagnating. The parliament is fractious and divided but hostile to the president. Society across France is very, very angry. The president won't go, and he
Mhm.
continues to propose prime ministers who are his friends and loyal allies, even though he knows that the parliament won't accept them. So, yes, there is this extraordinary personality, Emmanuel Macron, who is at the heart of this problem. But there is the bigger issue, which is this deep stagnation and failure of governance in the West.
But Macron can't continue like keep on having prime ministers and
No.
the resign one after another. At some point, I think somebody in France has been talking about impeachment, and then
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
right, and at some point maybe he has to go. You know.
Well, indeed. I mean, what has been interesting is that over the last 2 days, many of people who were Macron's political allies in the
Mhm.
past have said enough's enough. He must
Yeah.
step down. I mean, it's time for him to go. I mean, he's destabilizing continuously the political situation in France, and this situation is becoming intolerable. France needs a new president who's prepared to chart a new direction. But Macron doesn't want that because he worries that if he does step down, the election will result in either Marine Le Pen or someone from her party winning. And the European Union doesn't want that because Marine Le Pen and her party are hostile to some of the integrationist moves that are taking place in Europe. And the West collectively doesn't want that because Marine Le Pen and her party are hostile to continued support for Ukraine, continued pressure on China, sending more money to Ukraine, talking about sending French troops to Ukraine, all of those things. If they win, all of that comes to a stop. So, for that reason, let France sink deeper and deeper into crisis rather than actually have an election which results in the wrong people
Mhm.
winning. Another example of democracy in
Yeah.
the West working, how it really works.
Yeah. This European there's a European leaders summit, right? Speaking of Europe, there's several things that are interesting there. First of all, Angela Merkel she gave she was there and then she gave an interview to the Hungarian
Yeah,
press, right?
yeah,
So in that interview, she mentioned that before the running up to the Ukraine war,
yeah,
she and Macron would like to have a direct communication with Putin. But Poland and the three Baltic countries, they were against it, and
yeah,
so it didn't happen. So that part of the interview seems got a lot of reactions from Poland and the Baltic countries. They were so angry with her, like you cannot blame this on us, and blah blah. I watched that interview. That I didn't watch the whole thing. It was like a
yeah,
47 minutes long. But I actually don't feel when she said that she meant to blame them. I feel
no.
like she's more like a do not blame this on me kind of a more than
That's
anything else,
exactly
right?
you're completely correct. That's exactly what she was doing. I mean, she was trying to deflect blame for this crisis from herself.
Yeah.
And what you are starting to see in the West is a blame game going on. Everybody can see that Ukraine has been a disaster. Everybody can see that the war is going wrong. Everybody can see that the Russians sooner or later are going to win. Everybody can see that it's led to a deepening economic and social crisis in Europe. So, what they're all currently doing, or what they're all busy doing, is they're trying to create alibis and construct defenses. So, when it all comes to falls apart, they'll say, no, 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 it wasn't me. It was him. It was them. It was someone else. Never me. And I remember that proposal, by the way. I discussed it extensively at the
Okay.
time, and it was meaningless. It meant absolutely nothing. First of all, the Poles and the Baltic states did oppose it. It's true, but
Mhm.
then so did the Netherlands and
Okay.
other European countries. But the most outspoken critic of Merkel's proposal was Mark Rutte, who was the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, just to
Okay.
say, at
Uh,
that time. He's now Secretary General of NATO.
mhm.
But everybody knew when she proposed it that she was going to leave the scene in a few weeks' time.
Mhm.
So nobody took the proposal seriously.
Yeah.
She was just trying to give herself a get out of jail card before she left. And so she proposed this thing, which nobody took seriously at the time,
Mhm.
and which was then filed away and forgotten. And now that everybody could see the writing on the wall, as we say in Britain, she's just taken that out. She says, well, look, this was my plan. We would talk to Putin then, and that would have ended the war. But these bad and silly people in the Baltic states and Poland and elsewhere wouldn't let me.
Yeah, and she also blamed the pandemic, is saying that they couldn't
Yeah,
meet in person. I'm not
yeah,
so sure. I buy that, but yeah, but like you said, that yeah, that's my whole feeling when I watch that interview. Very much, she's trying to like, this is not my fault. I've done my
yeah,
part,
exactly,
and
exactly.
yeah. But it's interesting to see the reactions that Poland and the Baltic,
Yeah,
like,
yes.
nothing is doing well. So
No,
that's.
I mean, it should be said that there is one truth in all of this, which is that the Baltic states have played a massive role in creating the crisis in Europe. I mean, that these three very small countries, much more than Poland, by the way, have managed to infect the whole of Europe with their sense of grievance and hysteria
Mhm.
about Russia is really extraordinary. And one day there will have to be a discussion as to why and how it happened, why countries like Germany and France and Spain, you know, let themselves be swept along by the anger and fury in capitals of small places like Estonia and Lithuania or whatever. But I mean, saying that
Mhm.
shows that ultimately it is ridiculous to blame them. I mean, what ought to have happened long ago is that the leaders of Western Europe should have taken the Baltic states, the leaders of the Baltic states, to one side and said, look, we know about your history, we know about your
Mhm.
troubles with the Russians. Maintaining peace in Europe is more important. We have to develop a strong and good relationship with Russia. um, this is what you are going to do, what we are going to do, and you must accept that.
Mhm.
And if you don't, well, I'm afraid you're going to be marginalized. Nobody, nobody in Europe ever had that discussion with them.
It seems that Europe has the worst of the both sides, right? On the one
Mm,
hand, it's very authoritative, like assertive about their decisions. At the same time, they seem very about the small countries' reaction to certain things. So they take too much into account for those smaller countries. But why exactly the Baltic countries, right? There were other smaller countries too. But I guess maybe just because they themselves is afraid of Russia
Well, I
overall or
think so.
something.
I think this is it. I think this hysteria of the Baltic states plays into the underlying fear and
Mhm.
dislike of Russia
Yeah.
that you find in much of Europe. By the way, for the record, I know that in Russia, some people have increasingly come to calling Germany Greater Estonia. So that tells you what they think of Germany now.
It's true. I mean, I can see, because Germany is not doing what's best for
No,
Germany,
no,
so.
no.
And then the other thing also happened in this European Leaders Summit is the Tusk, Poland Prime Minister Donald Tusk, he and Orban had a little bit clash. And
Yeah,
Orban was talking about exactly, he's saying like Europeans are larger in terms of GDP and this and that, more population. Why are we so afraid of Russia? Why do we
yeah,
constantly see Russia as our enemy? But Russia is not our enemy. Our enemy
no,
is ours, almost like ourselves.
yeah.
And of course, Tusk could totally disagree on that.
Mm.
But I think Orban is correct. Why are you so afraid of Russia?
Well, it is an excellent question. I mean, this has been the big question in Europe since the fall of Napoleon, by the way. I mean, it has been there all the time. I mean, it's partly, undoubtedly, because Russia is so much bigger than all of
Mhm.
the other, I mean, in territory, than all of the other European states. It looks enormous. That must mean that it's, got some kind of evil plan to conquer all of Europe. The fact that they haven't done it in 200 years it's just this, not a sign that, they're not going to do it one day. It's just that their plan is taking a very long time to work out, I suppose. But anyway, I mean, this fear of this morbid fear of Russia has, it is behind nearly all the big crises. In fact, it is behind all of the big crises in Europe that have happened since the fall of Napoleon. I mean, the First World War ultimately was all about that, the fear of Russia that existed at that time in Germany. I've studied that period intensely. And the German ambassador to St. Petersburg in 1940 was writing memos to the government in Berlin and say, look, he's a very clever, by the way, very capable man, Count Portalis. And he was telling the government in Berlin, look, there is no threat to us from here. Russia is focused entirely on its own economic development and it's very, very increasing problems. I can tell you for a fact that from the Tsar down, nobody wants war with us. But in Berlin, they wouldn't believe that. And the chancellor of that time, who's a man called Bethmann Hollweg, was going around worrying that one day the Russians would advance all the way west and take over his own estate. I mean, paranoid things, but they are always there. They are always there lurking in the background.